Welcome everyone to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into the deeply fascinating, incredibly complex cultural history of the Indian subcontinent. We'll be exploring what this vast region actually looked like centuries ago, and then we'll see how that ancient past stacks up against the modern political maps we all recognize today. If you've ever wondered how the political map of South Asia transformed into the distinct, separate countries we know today, well, you are definitely in the right place.
So, we're kicking things off with a pretty provocative question, one that totally dominates a lot of modern discussions about South Asia's history and its shared traditions. The question is, was there really an Akhand Bharat? It's a term you've probably heard floating around in modern political discourse, but today we're going to peel back the layers and unpack exactly what the history tells us.
But hey, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's neutrally define exactly what we mean here. Akhand Bharat essentially refers to an undivided cultural and civilizational space. By nailing down this definition right at the start, it helps us objectively separate hard historical evidence from things like mythology, general cultural influence, and modern political ideas. Keep this core definition in the back of your mind. It's absolutely crucial as our anchor for today.
Here is our quick roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll start with the idea of Akhand Bharat, then travel outward to look at Western and Himalayan ties. From there, we'll trace historical routes into Southeast Asia and head down to Sri Lanka and the South. Finally, we'll bring it all back to the modern political map and conclude with why culture is not politics. Let's get into it.
All right, Section 1, the idea of Akhand Bharat and historical identity.
Think about the stark, frankly massive contrast between ancient, fluid geographical concepts and the rigid, drawn-in-stone political borders we have today. When you read ancient texts, you'll find regions described using expansive terms like Jambudvipa and Bharatavarsha. These terms define vast, sweeping cultural regions. But here's the key takeaway. Those terms did not necessarily correspond to the strict borders of a modern nation-state. Over thousands of years, kingdoms rose and fell, trade routes expanded, and political boundaries were constantly shifting. The ancient mind thought in terms of fluid cultural expanses, whereas today, well, we think in terms of strict, defined lines on a map.
Now, don't get me wrong. Massive political formations absolutely did exist in the ancient world. Just consider the sheer scale of the Mauryan Empire. Under iconic rulers like Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, this empire commanded territories extending across huge chunks of present-day India, and it stretched way out into areas that are now modern Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. It was a staggering political achievement for its time. But as you'll see, the story of this region's influence stretches far, far beyond even this massive empire.
Moving right along to Section 2, Western and Himalayan ties, specifically focusing on those Himalayan connections.
These historical connections literally stretch out in every direction. Let's look west to modern Afghanistan. It actually contains the ancient region of Gandhara. This was a massive center of art and learning, and it's deeply associated with the Mahabharata tradition through figures like Gandhari. Moving over to Iran, we see a connection that is much older than any modern borders, sharing deep Indo-Iranian linguistic roots. We're talking about the incredible similarities between the ancient languages of Sanskrit and Avestan. Then, looking north, we have Nepal, home to Lumbini, the traditional birthplace of Gautama Buddha, and the rich, vibrant traditions of the Kathmandu Valley. And finally, look at Tibet, where Indian Buddhist teachers like Padmasambhava played an absolutely essential role in developing Tibetan Buddhism. So the really crucial point here is that ideas, religions, and languages crossed borders seamlessly. They heavily influenced distinct civilizations like Iran and Afghanistan without making them permanent political provinces of India. They were very much their own distinct civilizations that just shared this incredible cultural cross-pollination.
Fast forward a bit closer to the present. Bhutan and Nepal maintained really unique relations with the Indian cultural world. Even without formal political unity, these deep cultural and diplomatic ties have persisted for centuries, right up to the modern era. Nepal, for instance, shares a long-standing tradition of relatively open movement with India. Meanwhile, Bhutan, which actually was never simply a province of British India, had its culture profoundly shaped by Indian and Himalayan religious traditions. Today, both of these nations maintain incredibly close diplomatic and economic relations with India.
All right, Section 3, influence across Southeast Asia, driven by maritime and overland trade.
It is just wild how this cultural exchange created magnificent, shared heritage thousands and thousands of miles from the subcontinent. Over in Cambodia, you have the awe-inspiring Angkor Wat, which actually transitioned over time from a Hindu site to a Buddhist one. Down in Indonesia, you'll find the Prambanan Temple complex, which stands today as one of the greatest surviving examples of ancient Hindu architecture on the planet. And over in Vietnam, the My Son Sanctuary serves as this remarkable reminder of the ancient Champa civilization, which was incredibly rich with Shaivism and Sanskrit inscriptions.
So, how exactly did all of this happen? Well, it was largely about the spread of stories and trade. The epic of the Ramayana traveled all across Southeast Asia, weaving itself right into local theater, literature, and traditions. In Myanmar, which, by the way, developed through its own regional powers and was never simply a permanent political part of India, the society there became deeply rooted in Buddhism that originated from the subcontinent. Down in the Malay world, the maritime Chola Empire played a huge defining role in Indian Ocean trade. We can clearly see that these lasting connections happened entirely through the organic movement of merchants, sailors, and religious teachers, even when absolutely no political borders existed between them.
Section 4. Sri Lanka and the South, exploring those deep historical ties.
When we look south to Sri Lanka, we kind of have to draw a line in the sand between literary tradition and established history. The island famously appears in the Ramayana tradition as Lanka. However, identifying the literary Lanka directly with every single feature of modern Sri Lanka is really a matter of tradition. On the flip side, we have established history. We know for a fact that historically, Buddhism traveled from India to Sri Lanka during Emperor Ashoka's era, specifically through the mission of Mahinda. And later on, South Indian kingdoms, including the Cholas, actually established direct political control over parts of the island. While it's super important to separate the literary tradition from the hard historical facts, both of these aspects prove just how deeply intertwined Sri Lanka's history is with the Indian mainland.
Next up, Section 5, the modern political map and those massive 20th century ruptures.
We have to talk about this because, wow, the 20th century violently and rapidly fractured the modern political map. Pre-1947, the region was, of course, under British colonial rule. Then came 1947, the partition of British India and the creation of Pakistan. This event caused enormous human suffering and triggered literally one of the largest mass migrations in modern human history. A bit later in 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh after a devastating war that involved Indian military intervention. These traumatic, massive events forever altered the geography of South Asia, cementing the strict modern borders we see today.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6. Culture is not politics. Let's synthesize this history.
Despite those sprawling, massive empires we talked about earlier, history shows us there honestly was never a single ancient state with the exact same borders as the modern concept of Akhand Bharat. Instead, the reality is that the region was a vibrant collection of numerous distinct kingdoms and empires. They are connected at different times by trade, pilgrimage, and shared traditions, rather than operating as a single, unified nation-state.
Here's the really crucial takeaway from all of this. Cultural influence does not automatically equal political ownership. Sharing a language like Sanskrit, a religion like Buddhism or Hinduism, or an architectural style across thousands of miles simply does not mean one nation historically belongs to another. Just as Iran and Myanmar evolved as totally distinct civilizations despite sharing deep roots with India, this cultural exchange is a testament to human connection, not necessarily political dominion.
So, what's the ultimate lesson we can draw from South Asian history? Well, the map has changed countless times, and our shared human history is far, far older than today's strict borders. Today, the idea of an undivided subcontinent is primarily a modern cultural and political vision. Whether a future political union could ever happen is highly uncertain and, frankly, depends entirely on the sovereign choices of modern countries and their peoples. But the true marvel, the thing I really want you to take away from this explainer, is how ideas, languages, religions, and art just kept crossing those borders anyway, creating a brilliantly interconnected human history.
To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. Is Akhand Bharat best understood as a historical memory, a beautiful cultural idea, or a possible political vision for the future? I would absolutely love to hear your perspective on this. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, keep questioning the narrative, and keep exploring the fascinating, fluid history behind our modern maps. Thank you so much for joining me today.